Evidently all the great religions have kernels of truth in them that enable one to become as intimately close to God as is humanly possible. Some of the kernels of truth are celebrated in great temples dedicated to deities, or are simply dedicated to love and humanity, as the case may be. And depending on the times, many of the celebrated kernels of truth have worked wonders and have in numerous individual ways shaped the identities of nations and religion. Some still do so. In the Christian religions, one of the great stumbling blocks that obscure the kernels of truth that have impeded progress through all ages, and still are, appears to be a far too limited perception of Christ Jesus' history, and what he has represented and still does represent. In this regard, being trapped into a false sense of the Christ, humanity is like so many living dead that have a need to be awakened. A deep-reaching healing is required here of the perceived image of the Christ, and with it the healing of society. The Christ and society evidently are one. Maybe this is what the painting shown here, of Christ healing, is intended to illustrate. The healer is the impersonal Christ, the universal spiritual idea of God, uplifting humanity. One thing is certain, the scene shown here is not found narrated anywhere in the Gospels. The female figure being roused in the coffin is therefore not a specific person, but is symbolically humanity. 2 verses of a poem have been added to the painting. In tender mercy, spirits bed a loyal ray to rouse the living, wake the dead, and point the way. The Christ idea, God anoints, of truth and life, the way in science he appoints, that stills all strife. Here the question presents itself, are the man and woman observing the healing representatives of the pioneers who were present at the manger? Maybe they are. When the religion of Islam was created in the shadow of the cultural wasteland that Rome left behind when it collapsed into the sewer of its decadence, Islam became a light in the world that ignited a new revival of the human focus, a revival of art, discoveries, knowledge, and science that together started a new age for humanity. The resulting new spiritual renaissance that Islam had created, the Islamic Renaissance, became the light of a dawning sense of truth that ended the horrors of the Dark Age in Europe, by its laying the foundation for the Golden Renaissance. It was Islam that had created the scientific searching that brought Plato's science approach back from obscurity and brought Plato into Europe, where it created a new cultural background. From this background the finest gems of the Christian ideology were brought back to life, which became the light for the Golden Renaissance. On this platform, far down the line, though still hampered by many of the religious fictions, a new dawn for humanity began in America, with the creation of a new nation that would not be built on empire or any specific religion, but on the greatest gems of humanity that were discovered up to this time through the fog of the numerous religious and historic fictions. This appears to be the path of civilization, a path of discovering the truth about our profound human nature. The more we succeed, the greater will be our prosperity, and the more secure our peace. The apparent universal principle of science and humanity is amazingly reflected in the rise and fall of the most scientific Christian religion that ever became established in our world. In 1866 an American woman made a profound breakthrough in discovering the scientific platform of Christ healing. Through her work, spiritual healing of the type that Christ Jesus had demonstrated became widespread and became so effective that it started a new healing profession. The woman, Mary Baker Eddy, called her scientific spiritual platform Christian Science. The point here is not that the remarkable spiritual healing achievements that Christ Jesus had once demonstrated had become possible again, and border, as in times past, on the miraculous. The point is that this revival had raised the humanist platform of scientific perception so high that the result had coincided with the greatest period of peace the world had seen in hundreds of years. It was as if the train of horrors and wars in the world had stopped for the period when the woman's breakthrough work had begun, and had remained stopped until the year after her death in December 1910. After Mary Baker Eddy's death all hell broke loose again, with the train now rolling in high gear, still gaining speed and momentum. Many thousands of people have testified that this amazing period of peace and healing was not fiction, that it has happened, and that a trickle is still happening. The question arises from this is, where do we find our present age located against this vast background? One thing is certain, that the resolution of the question will have a great impact on whether the Ice Age challenge will be met. The challenge should inspire us in the present to bring the present world population of 7 billion people into the coming new Ice Age world, with the greatest prosperity of all times, in all respects. We have the power to do this, even while it appears that the dawn of the new Ice Age is already in the early transition stages, and may be fully upon us in 30 years' time. But if we fail, I think the answer is too horrid to contemplate, which means that we will not fail. In this respect, the man Christ Jesus still stands before us as the great exemplar, a man who drew together the majestic scientific, cultural, and spiritual achievement of his time and of times before, and started a new age for humanity that is still unfolding. In the closing pages of the Bible, John the Revelator tells us of a great spiritual city, the city Foursquare, descending from God out of heaven to humanity. With this revelation, John gives us a taste of the type of scientific concepts that may have stood behind Jesus' grand achievements, which he himself was likely a participant of. 1800 years later, Mary Baker Eddy picked up the thread that John the Revelator had presented. In the last pages of her textbook on Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy presents an extensive narration with spiritual definitions of the features of the Foursquare city. At the end of her 44 years of scientific and spiritual development, she leaves to us a profound scientific platform for the healing of humanity, which she has functionally placed into the Foursquare city. Thus, she continued the scientific environment in which Christ Jesus was born, and grew up in, and had extended with his own achievements, into spiritual realms that no one had explored before. Mary Baker Eddy had referred to Jesus of Nazareth as the most scientific man that ever trod the globe. She evidently carried on this tradition. Her scientific work, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, was progressively developed into a work of more than 400 editions before she laid the pen down, which reflect her own constant self-development. The book has sold over 10 million copies since it was first published in 1875. Ironically, the most fundamental aspects contained in the book, those related to the city Foursquare structure that Mary Baker Eddy had placed all of her works into, which Christ Jesus appears to have started, remain still largely unrecognized. They are mostly deemed not to exist. This means that the great scientific work that Christ Jesus had begun over 2,000 years ago remains yet to be fully applied. This also means that humanity at large has not yet fully realized what a powerful spiritual resource it has available in its own history for the advance of its civilization. The more that this realization is made, the more will the world change into a landscape of freedom on a scale that has not yet been seen on this planet. My own effort in exploring the dimension of the principle of universal love, which still appears nearly as impossible to implement in today's world as it probably had been in the distant age when Jesus was born, has become a series of 12 novels with a single story threaded through all 12 volumes, which I named summarily The Lodging for the Rose. May we find the gem that is love, when it comes to light as love in our heart, which is symbolized by the rose, becoming a light for us on our path that leads to a future where we find the grandest ever meaning for the term humanity, and with it for the term God. Here the exploration sequence, the alternate Jesus, comes to a close, but will the implementation of the principle of universal love ever close, which Christ Jesus had represented to the fullest that was possible in his age? No, the sequence will never end. Symbolically, I drew together a number of dialogues from the 12 novels, The Lodging for the Rose, and presented them in video form in order to let the exploration continue.